No police department in the country has had problems like Miami's. 1/10 of the force, almost 100 officers, is off the job. Some of them suspended, others fired. A lot of them indicted or convicted of serious crimes, including the theft of a ton of cocaine. One of the officers even pled guilty to murder. Miami hired officers who ended up committing crimes most crooks could only imagine. For example, a group of more than a dozen police officers raided this Miami River boatyard in the summer of 1985 with the help of some of their drug dealer friends. Most were in uniform, some were even on duty when they climbed the fence to steal 400 kilos of cocaine, almost 900 pounds. Alex Alvarez is the lead detective who helped crack the case.
What they did, if you can imagine, an assembly line of policemen from this boat to the fence.
All the way around here?
All the way around the fence. They started passing duffel bags of cocaine, one to another. They had 3 police cars, all 3 parked right outside this fence.
Marked cars?
Marked City of Miami police cars.
And they put the cocaine in there?
In there. The back seats stacked up to the roof and in the trunks of the cars.
In duffel bags?
In duffel bags.
How many duffel bags, you know?
I don't know exactly, 40, 50 of them.
40 or 50? This man was there, a Miami cop who's now serving 15 years in a federal penitentiary in a special section reserved for protected witnesses.
To this day, I don't know exactly how much it was. Okay, I didn't count it. I just got my share, and that's all I cared about. My share was 30 kilos of cocaine, and I received $500,000 from it.
2 weeks later, they did it again. After checking out this boatyard from a boat on the river, they raided the yard one night when the cocaine was being unloaded by a crew of 7. Their take? Another 400 kilos of cocaine. Which is worth about how much?
About that time, wholesale value around $12 million.
$12 million. What happened to the guys who had been unloading the boat?
They all jumped into the water. 3 drowned. 4 survived.
But when those 3 bodies turned up in the Miami River, Detective Alvarez and his unit started an investigation that eventually led to the arrest and prosecution of 14 cops. This cop's share from the second raid was $600,000. His total take from the 2 ripoffs was well over $1 million. Altogether, the cops cleared $16 million. The first prosecution in state court ended in a mistrial. During that time, the defendants plotted murder to protect themselves. Leon Kellner is the U.S. attorney who supervised the second trial in federal court.
5 of the defendants got together and decided that it was too expensive to pay their lawyers for a second trial. So rather than pay their lawyers, they decided it would be cheaper to kill the witnesses.
Although they never carried out the plan, they waited outside this video store for one of the witnesses.
They were scheming. They were armed with machine guns and shotguns and revolvers and semi-automatic pistols. And they plotted, if we have a chance, when he comes out of this video store, we'll just kidnap him, kill him, and drive over to one of the U.S. attorney's house and drop his body on top of the hood of her car.
You know, there's a lot of times a saying that there is police officers who turn crooked. Unfortunately, in this instance, it was the reverse. They were crooks first and then became police officers, many of them.
Take a look at some of the job applications and background files, and you might ask yourself how these men ever became cops, law enforcers. This cop, who made $2 million from stealing cocaine and fled the country before being captured, admitted that he'd committed petty theft, that he'd stolen gas twice from trucks, stolen a car battery, and when he was 13, he even stole his father's car. 2 former employers said they wouldn't hire him again. One added he was undependable and untruthful. This man, who made $800,000 from the sale of cocaine and was part of the plan to murder witnesses, was hired even though he admitted he'd used cocaine and marijuana. He'd also been fired from his job with the power company for falsifying meter readings. Another cop admitted to breaking into cars to steal radios when he was 17. And this cop paid a hitman to kill his nephew because that nephew was trying to steal his hidden drug money. He'd admitted he'd been arrested for theft. This Miami cop, who's still a fugitive, was fired from 3 of the 7 jobs he'd held before he applied for work at the police department, the last time for stealing gas from a car in the parking lot. Dick Witt is now chief of the Hollywood, Florida Police Department. He was in charge of training the Miami Police Department recruits during some of the time when the police department was hiring officers like these.
I can recall one occasion where I got a call from a woman who was appalled to find out that one of her young neighbors was a police recruit of ours going to the police academy.
What was her objection to him being on the force?
That he was a drug dealer. Not a user, mind you. He was a drug dealer.
The most shocking part of all is most of these corrupt cops were hired during the same 2.5-year period, and some of them were bad the day they applied for the job, and the department knew it. Why did Miami hire men like these? They were recruited during the police department's hiring frenzy, which began in mid-1980 when a severely understaffed department faced overwhelming new problems. The Mariel boat lift, which some estimates say dumped more than 30,000 Cuban criminals in downtown Miami in just 60 days, and the race riots in the Liberty City section of Miami. So a police department used to hiring no more than 50 officers a year hired about 600 in under 3, and in many cases they paid little attention to the kind of recruit they hired. We talked to a police detective who participated in the background checks of those recruits during the hiring push in 1980-81. Because he's still a member of the police department, he declined an on-camera interview. But he told us during that period, someone's background didn't disqualify them from a job on the police department. As an example, he cited recruits who admitted to smoking marijuana 55 times, to using cocaine 6 times, and were still hired. He said, we even hired people who were active in the criminal community. He said they even hired people who admitted that they had looted stores during the Miami riots, riots that took place just a month before they applied for a job on the police department. Ken Harms was the police chief when most of the corrupt cops were recruited. He says the affirmative action program, which was instituted about the time the department's hiring push began, is to blame for any bad officers his department employed. All the officers hired during the push were recruited under the terms of a new consent decree negotiated by the city with the Justice Department. 56% of all recruits had to be black, Hispanic, or women. We asked Harms why the affirmative action program would cause police department corruption.
Hiring from only within the city of Miami absolutely precluded the selection of the best candidates. We went from a nationwide recruiting base all the way down to a Miami-only base. The 80% minority requirement for minorities, no other department in the country has been faced on the scale we were faced with it, of hiring 80% minorities. Justice Department figure was 56%. City Commission upped that to 80%, and I'm sure that the motivation was good.
Maurice Ferre was the mayor of Miami who helped negotiate the terms of the affirmative action program with the Justice Department. His administration promoted Ken Harms to police chief.
The consent decree said that 56% of future hiring had to be minority. You increased the percentage to 80%.
Yes, I did, and that was my doing.
Why?
And the fact is that if you look at the record, up until 1979 and 1980, the City of Miami Police Department was totally, I mean 99% white male dominated. And I was determined since 1975 to get a police department that was reflective of the community it was serving.
So you don't think there was anything wrong with the way you went out and got people?
I think the only questionable part was the limiting of the selection of police officers from within the boundaries of the city of Miami.
But Maurice Ferre said he doesn't think the city's affirmative action program is to blame.
I didn't know that they were accepting people who had experimented with drugs, had been fired 4 times in the last year, were in the investigation said to be untrustworthy. I was not privy to that information.
But there were warnings. A management consultant concluded that 50% of the force had less than a year's experience on the street, and there weren't enough veteran officers to train the rookies now coming out of the academy in droves. He predicted disaster if the hiring frenzy wasn't stopped and reassessed.
I mean, if a red flag went up then, why didn't you say, let's stop it, we're doing this wrong, we're getting the wrong kind of officer, we're getting too many, too fast, we can't train them, we don't have enough qualified, experienced people on the street, let's stop and reassess this thing.
Not my decision.
You run the department.
You really believe that?
You're the chief of police?
Ken Harms said he had little choice about the people his department hired.
We were simply forced into taking many people that simply should not have been police officers. And I was dictated to with regard to selection, with regard to hiring, with regard to all of those issues as it related to new hires.
Was Ken Harms told specifically to hire unqualified people? I doubt it very much. Not accepting the blame, you know, is just typical of Harms. How can a man who was the police chief, who is an officer of the court, sworn to uphold the law and to do his job, now claim that he has no responsibility for what happened in 1980 when he was the commander-in-chief of the police department? He's the guy responsible. He can't say that somebody else is putting pressure on him.
The problem in Miami wasn't that they set out to hire minorities, but the kind of person they approved for the job.
Now, who set the standards for who conducted the background investigation?
Background investigators were selected by the department and told specifically what areas to make inquiries on.
By the police department?
Yes, sir.
And he was responsible to who?
To the chain of command within the administrative division of the Miami Police Department.
So that was your department? Ultimately, he reported to you?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Let me ask you to look at the big picture for a minute. You've got almost 100 police officers down here who have been either suspended, fired, or convicted of serious crimes. Of that number, almost 4 out of 5 of them were hired during your tenure as chief of police. What does that say?
Well, of the 75 people that have been charged either criminally or administratively or are currently under investigation, their conduct for which they're being investigated simply occurred after I left. It may simply be a matter of historical accident that they waited until after 1984 to get caught. But I would suggest to you that a very strong command structure and a disciplinary process may have helped keep officers who had a propensity to do things that were incorrect or bad in line. Given their background, maybe they leaned in that direction.
And when you were there was a strong command structure that kept them in line?
I would say that was the case with many officers, yes, sir.
And when you were there, these people with questionable things in their background became members of the police department?
Yeah, I think that's a foregone conclusion at this point. The majority of people on that list simply were hired during that time period, and many of them simply should not have been police officers on the Miami Police Department.
Dick Witt had to train those questionable recruits.
I think commissioners have got to share some of the blame because they politicized the system with their demand for 80% minority hiring when we were pushed to our max to recruit quality people when we were up into the 50%. I think the chief of police has got to accept responsibility for never having objected. But then even those of us in a lower rank, even those of us who brought up some objections, I can't help but feel that perhaps we should have been more strident in our objections. We should have objected more loudly, more often.
The story you just saw would have been impossible to report without the complete cooperation of the current Miami Police Chief, Clarence Dixon, who is determined that this kind of thing never happen again to his police force. To help the Justice Department make sure it never happens again anywhere, Chief Dixon will be working this summer with the Justice Department in a nationwide investigation of police corruption.